Let's talk about the UK involvement in the peace process here. How big a role did the UK play, Rachel?
Well, Ollie, that depends on how you define the UK, doesn't it?
Very good point. Yeah, it's twin track, isn't it? Because you'd be forgiven for thinking I was referring to the British government, but there's also something else going on here.
Well, there's Mr. Blair. there's Tony Blair, who has come back for his second act, third act, fourth act. I've lost track of how many acts we're on.
Yeah.
But who has been working very closely behind the scenes with both the Trump administration and the Israeli government, and looks like he will be leading this interim Gaza
chairman of the board. Yeah. Chairman of the peace board.
Yes, indeed. And it's kind of quite significant that we've got like a former prime minister who's going to be playing a bigger role in this than the actual Prime Minister. We can come on to the role the actual Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is playing in a moment. But what I found really interesting looking at this is that Tony Blair's role in it has gone back months or years. So back when Trump was first elected, so 2016, so after he'd been elected but before he'd been inaugurated, Tony Blair had dinner or was seen having a meal with Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, where it was suggested possibly he was pitching to be Trump's Middle Eastern envoy. He denied that. He certainly didn't get that gig, but that's how long he has been discussing the Middle East with the Trump team. It's almost 10 years.
Yeah, there's a clip going round of Campbell, Alistair Campbell, that is, interviewing Blair at the time, and he's trying to draw criticism out of Blair, of Donald Trump. You know, Campbell's been quite forthright, so he's attacking the judiciary, he's attacking the media, isn't he a fascist, Tony? And Tony Blair will not be drawn on it, ever the diplomat. Okay, let's dial into the government for a second, Ethan. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, at the weekend, speaking to Trevor Phillips on Sky News, says that Britain has played a, quote, key role behind the scenes in securing the Gaza ceasefire. Is that true?
Well, it was immediately quibbled, wasn't it, by people in the administration and also in the Israeli government. So you have Mike Huckabee sort of mocking Bridget Phillipson on the internet. And yet there's been a curveball today because Steve Witkoff, Trump's kind of leading emissary across the world in all kinds of foreign policy issues, has now said actually it was Jonathan Powell. It wasn't just the UK, it was Jonathan Powell, the National Security Advisor, currently on the domestic front, pretty embattled because of this whole China spy scandal, alleged China spy scandal, I should say.
No, I think it's definitely a China spy scandal. The precise nature of what happened.
I just mean
definitely
alleged,
a scandal.
Alleged in terms of who was possibly not doing anything illegal.
So Mike Huckabee writes on X, he quote tweets the Phillipson clip, and he says, "I assure you, she's delusional. She can thank Donald Trump anytime just to set the record straight." And I saw that quote and I thought, well, is this just sort of a typical bombastic, MAGA coded, she doesn't know what she's talking about. All the credit, of course, goes to our glorious leader. Witkoff dispels it a little bit. He says, quote, "I would like to acknowledge the vital role of the United Kingdom in assisting and coordinating efforts that have led us to this historic day in Israel. In particular, I want to recognise the incredible input and tireless efforts of National Security Advisor Jonathan Powell." So, Ethan, who is Jonathan Powell?
Well, I'd just like to say that, by the way, there are two things going on there, because you've both got the defence of Powell, which is very interesting, but you also have, I suppose, a split in MAGA world slightly, because Huckabee is... he's America's ambassador to Israel. He's naturally, by the nature of his job, close to the Israeli government, and also partly the reason why he was appointed to that role was because he's close to politicians in Israel. And there's a lot of animosity towards the current UK government in Israel. So you've also had Sharon Haskell, the Deputy Foreign Minister, tweeting about Britain's role being over-egged. And Sharon Haskell was actually at Conservative Party conference last week doing an extraordinary speech in which she condemned the government for all sorts of things. And it was one of the most undiplomatic things I've ever seen a foreign minister do in terms of interventions in UK politics.
Give us a sense of the flavour of that, Ethan. What was she saying?
Well, she was saying that, children in British schools don't learn to love their country. It was kind of the culture war stuff, which seemed so far beyond the realm of what she was, I suppose, there to talk about. I mean, originally, especially she was talking about, the relationship between the UK and Israel, how the Conservative Party had a close relationship, the Labour Party a less close relationship, partly because of the recognition of a state of Palestine, and then really getting into the weeds almost of kind of critiquing day-to-day domestic policy by the Labour government and saying that it needs to be more kind of patriotic and forthright on various issues.
I think the point about there being a split in MAGA land about the UK is definitely the case, and is also something that, you know, it's not just about recognition of Palestine and how to deal with Israel. If you look at sort of J.D. Vance's approach to the UK, some of the stuff he said about, you know, we're an Islamist nation, we don't have free speech, but just he seems to really, really dislike the UK specifically, whereas Donald Trump seems to really love the UK specifically, and seems, and this is something that everyone finds very weird, has a quite close, amicable, friendly relationship with Keir Starmer, and has actually helped Starmer on numerous occasions. So when he was asked about the UK recognising a Palestinian state in his state visit, he could have, I mean, he didn't say, yeah, I think it's a great idea, but he could have been really bombastically
in fact, you would expect him to be
outraged by. You would expect him, and he wasn't. And he kind of said, you know, they can do what they want, and we'll do something different. So there's definitely a split in how various people around Trump see the UK, and I think that came out in those two tweets. You know, on the one hand, she's delusional, Bridget Phillipson, and on the other hand, you know, the vital role that the United Kingdom played that could not be more different in tone.
Maybe that first state visit was actually, we didn't recognise it for what it was, which was Trump's first intervention in his diplomatic era. You know, before he brings peace to the Middle East, it was a first step towards it. Ethan, come on then, tell us about Jonathan Powell. Who is he? How we got to this point? Give me a sense of the history.
Well, so Jonathan Powell begins life. I mean, one of the important facts about him, I suppose, is that his brother, Charles Powell, they pronounce it differently, which I think is a key to understanding their politics. Because Charles Powell was Margaret Thatcher's foreign policy advisor for years. I mean, he was actually a civil servant, but she kept him around in Downing Street because she thought he was so essential to her kind of political project. So that was Charles Powell. And then his younger brother, Jonathan Powell, was a civil service diplomat for a long time, but always a man who kind of understood where power lay and how to sort of smartly work around getting ahead in life. I don't mean that to sound like he somehow doesn't deserve it. He's clearly an intelligent man, but he was a civil service diplomat. He went to America in the early 1990s. He befriended a young rising politician called Bill Clinton because he'd been at Oxford with him when Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. He then kind of manages to make himself a power player in Washington. Two young Labour politicians called Tony Blair and Gordon Brown visit Washington to meet Clinton in the 90s. Powell starts to befriend them. Then he flies back, is interviewed, and becomes, in 1994, when Tony Blair is elected leader of the Labour Party, the chief of staff to Tony Blair, and stays in that position right the way up to 2007 when Blair leaves 10 Downing Street. So he's pretty much the longest serving sort of behind-the-scenes figure in that Blair ministry. So he's been an influential figure in British politics for a long time. He then left and went to work at, I think it was Morgan Stanley as a banker. Well, not quite a banker, but he worked at a large commercial bank, and then has now returned to politics as the National Security Advisor for Keir Starmer. And that was sort of an appointment that was made quite a few months after the election, but he's immediately established himself as a massively important figure. I mean, his roll call of kind of things he's been involved in include, you know, they go back to arms control negotiations under the Soviet Union. Then he was a key figure in Hong Kong being ceded back to China in 1997. Then the Good Friday Agreement. He wrote a book about his very important role there. Now he's come back. He's kind of the guy behind Chagos. He's the guy who's become a really good friend of Steve Witkoff, who we mentioned earlier, Trump's emissary, was kind of one of the orchestrators of the Zelensky Downing Street visit, which happened a few days after the Oval Office bust-up, which I think you know that kind of really well orchestrated scene where Starmer welcomes Zelensky into Downing Street and says, "You'll always be welcome here," kind of as a contrast. As a contrast with the Powell. Well, to get to the sort of meat of your question, who is Jonathan Powell? I mean, he's a guy who understands power, understands where it lies, and understands the importance of relationships, really. And I've been reading through one of his books, which he published over 10 years ago, called The New Machiavellian, which he talks about his sort of theory of power. And he says, power, like the crock of gold at the end of the rainbow, is never where you think it will be. And he talks about the illusion of power in Downing Street and how you get into Downing Street, and it's never quite as easy as it seems.
The implication being that he is the power broker,
sort of,
in Downing Street.
Sort of. I mean, it's quite a funny book. It's called The New Machiavellian. He contrasts himself with Niccolo Machiavelli throughout the book, and how, you know, both of them had kind of been in subservient roles as advisors, but had used this to kind of understand the way in which power worked. There's quite a funny line where he says that Tony Blair understood the people, but I dedicated my time to understanding princes, which is the sort of late 15th century Florentine version of modern prime ministers and ministers.
Machiavelli's book, right, is, I will butcher the Italian pronunciation, but it's like Il Principe, isn't it? Yeah. It's like the prince. Okay, so I can't. Is that incredibly self-effacing or incredibly arrogant to compare himself in those terms? I don't know.
I think it's
possibly both.
It's both, isn't it? Yeah. I think there's a level of self-awareness there. And I actually think that Blair is quite similar in the way that his view on power is also built on relationships, and relationships that don't necessarily fall along political lines the way you would expect. I mean, George W. Bush being obviously one, UK Labour Prime Minister, Republican President, and also what Blair has done since leaving office in 2007. It's all been about relationships and realpolitik and getting to know who the important players are. So Tony Blair goes off and is special envoy to the quartet. So that's the US, the UN, the EU, and Russia, which is a sort of group that's looking at peace in the Middle East and the Israel-Palestine problem. So Tony Blair goes off and does that until 2015, builds a whole load of relationships in the Middle East, or actually cements the relationships that he got, and then comes back and founds the Tony Blair Institute. And one of the first things that they do is take on the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for a contract worth, I think, £9 million. All of what Blair has done since he was Prime Minister is kind of about, well, hang on, you've got all these relationships from being Prime Minister. You're no longer Prime Minister. Are there other ways of influencing? Are there other ways of continuing to be a global player when you are no longer a world leader? And I think he left in 2007, and I can't do maths. Is that 18 years ago?
Yeah,
it's 18 years ago, and look, he's back centre stage. So clearly, it's worked.
Perhaps no small part a guilty conscience about some of his other activities in the Middle East.
I think that would involve acknowledging that he was wrong, which I don't think he has ever done publicly.
I don't think so either.
It's worth saying, by the way, sorry, I just point that Jonathan Powell and Tony Blair, although we have a very, very long and intimate history, it doesn't seem like they're both key figures in this Gaza peace agreement, but it doesn't seem like they kind of coordinated with each other. Powell has had his role as NSA. Blair, as you mentioned, strong relationships with Kushner and other people in Trump world. I suppose if it demonstrates anything, it's that both of them learn similar lessons from their time in 10 Downing Street, right? And both know, as I say, where power lies and how to use it. So it's not like it's some kind of stitch up and they've both sort of secretly organised this whole thing together. I think it's just the fact they're men whose way of thinking is so similar and in tune that they've ended up kind of going about this in the same way.
They're both power players, and as a result of that, they've both ended up in the same place. It feels extraordinary that we're talking about two unelected figures. Very little of our conversation so far has encompassed the role of the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who is attending the summit. Yeah. Should we say the PM is going. Rachel, talk to me about Starmer's role in this, and also what I see as it's almost as if he retreats right to the international stage. He's got issues domestically. The most, according to polling, unpopular prime minister since polling began, and yet, generally speaking, pretty successful on the international stage. So, is this an example of Starmer kind of scuttling away from his domestic problems to go and take solace in the international order? So
he's certainly not alone in that's a thing that under fire prime ministers often do. Boris Johnson was always off to Ukraine anytime there was a story on Partygate. I think we're being a little bit unfair on the Starmer point because it's such a momentous day. Can you imagine if he wasn't there, if Emmanuel Macron was there, if all of these other world leaders are there and Starmer's not? I mean, I think it's more about showcasing Britain's position in the world, and we probably would have a view on that. I remember when Rishi Sunak decided that he wasn't going to go to COP and then decided at the last minute that he was, because it just looked so bad for us not to be represented there. On Britain's role in this or on the UK government's role in this, I think like two things can be true. It's certainly the case that the main driver is the US and was always going to be the US because the US is the only country, Trump is the only world leader that can put the kind of pressure on the Israeli government and Netanyahu that was necessary. Just in terms of size and money and influence, we were never going to be able to play that role. And I think that's no one's really arguing that. I think it's also the case that behind the scenes, work needed to be done to keep Trump invested in it. Like, dare we say that he has a slightly short attention span? And also the growing pressure from the rest of the world on the urgency of it. Like that I think has an impact too. Would this have happened without the UK? Probably, in some form. Did we help behind the scenes smooth the way to enable it to happen the way that it has? I think that's also probably true. I think Mike Huckabee calling Bridget Phillipson delusional is a bit unfair and probably says more about his views of both the UK and perhaps of her personal politics that are sort of the antithesis of his views in and the MAGA movement. So I think both can be true, and I think it's right that Starmer is there, and I think it's also right that we don't try and take credit that we don't deserve.
Ethan, should we give Donald Trump credit for achieving this peace deal?
It would be childish to say no, I think.
Emily Thornberry said yes. I just throw that out there because she's if Emily Thornberry is saying he deserves
she's been very
credit for
strident
this.
in her criticism of Trump in the past. So if she, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, is saying it,
she said she would wear a MAGA hat if the peace deal lasted. I mean, obviously, this is the very first stages of it, so we'll have to wait and see.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? The key question now is whether or not this holds. The key question is hostage release, prisoner exchange. There is still the not insignificant point of negotiating the disarmament of Hamas. Whether that will happen very definitely remains to be seen.